get practice. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Made me self-conscious about this thing.
It was fun.
Can you see me? Okay. All right. Put it back the way it was. Okay, so this Torah portion is going to be coming from Genesis chapter 12. I'm just working my Mac. Okay. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 to chapter 17, verse 27. And the Torah portion is called Lecha, which means what, class?
Go forth.
Right. It means to go forth yourself or to go forth. And this Torah portion is talking about our patriarch, Abraham, and it's just going to introduce him to us and also introduce some principles that we are going to recognize as people that have read the New Testament, which I'm going to touch into that in a moment. I want to start this Torah portion off with Matthew chapter 27, though, because that's what the Holy Spirit talked to me about this week. He woke me up in my sleep and said Matthew chapter 27. And I know that's towards the end of the book. This is my dialogue with God. I know that's towards the end of the book. And I know at the end of our New Testament, Jesus dies. So my question to God was, why do you want us to look at Matthew chapter 27, and how does it relate to our Torah portion? So that's what we are going to discover together. So Matthew chapter 27, and I'm going to skip down here. Well, I'll just start at chapter 1, verse 1. It says, when the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. So Jesus is about to be put on the cross because they accused him of being the king of the Jews, right? Mm-hmm. Which he never out of his mouth spoke anything contrary, or he never really agreed with anything that they said. He pretty much let them run away with their idea or their perspective of him. Okay? And it says, and when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. And then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself and brought again 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. So we're going to make a note, right? Because we're talking about our Torah portion. We're trying to give you a little overview. We're talking about our Torah portion. God tells us to look at Matthew 27. And then in the chapters, we're already seeing Jesus is going to be hung on the cross. It's talking about Jesus' death. It's talking about Judas and the 30 pieces of silver. Right? And then as we read further down, it says in verse 3, Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself and brought again 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests of elders, saying, I have sinned in that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? And see you to that. So pretty much Judas was paid to betray Jesus. Right? And he was paid 30 pieces of silver. And he knew that Jesus was not guilty, so he felt bad about it. But the elders didn't really care. They just wanted him killed because he was causing too much change. People don't like change. Okay? Mm-hmm. And so they said, what's that to us? And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. And the chief priests took the silver pieces and said, it's not lawful for them, not lawful for to put them into the treasury, because it's the price of blood. And they took counsel and brought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in it. There's a law in Deuteronomy that says you cannot take money for blood. And that's what that's referencing. So they couldn't take that money. And so they took counsel. They got together and decided to put it in the potter's field to buy where they bury strangers in. And then it says, wherefore that field was called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, and they took 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued, whom they of the children of Israel did value, and gave them for the potter's field as the Lord appointed me. And Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus responded, you say. He didn't say, I am the king of the Jews. He never said who he was right out. And when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he answered nothing. Then said Pilate to him, hear you not how many things they say against you? And he answered him to never a word, and so much that the governor marveled greatly. Now this chapter is very, very long. So I'm just going to go over briefly that, because we all know the story. If we have been converted into Christianity, you all make the confession, you all understand what the Lord did for us at Calvary. Now, they accuse him, they strip him of his clothes, they degrade him to the point where even biblically they couldn't go beyond 40 stripes, because it's demeaning in their culture and the world, because at that point you would humiliate the person. So they only did a certain amount of stripes. They cast lots for his robe, and then Jesus had to go and be hung with guilty people on the cross, because on either side of him were actual criminals. And they went to the people and they even said to them, who shall we free, right? The innocent person that they claim is innocent, or the criminal. And they decided to let the criminal go free versus Jesus, all to prove this point out. Okay? So, now, so he's hanging on the cross, right? And he's made to look like a sinner. He's made to take on the curse, right? And so then Jesus is hung, and then he dies, right? And so at that moment, I'm at 47, because there's like 60 verses in here. No, yeah, 66 verses. So I'm trying to briefly go over this. At that point, he died, right? But before he died, he said to God, you know, Eli, Eli, ma sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me, right? And then he died, gave up the ghost, right? And then 54, it said, oh, okay, let me start right here. So then it says 47, some of them that stood there when they heard that said, this man calls for Elijah. Immediately one of them ran and took a sponge and filled it with vinegar, put it on a reed and gave it to him. The rest said, let us see whether Elijah will come and save him. They're still mocking him, right? So Jesus cried out, he yielded up the ghost, the veil of the temple was rent, there was an earthquake, it was dark outside, the graves were open, many bodies of the saints which slept rose up, so he's the first of the dead, right? And came out of the graves after his resurrection, went into the holy city and appeared to many, right? So these dead people are walking, this is walking dead right now. And then now when the centurion and they that went with him, watching Jesus, saw the earthquake, and they were greatly terrified, they feared greatly, saying, this is the Son of God. And many that were with him, that were following him, were watching out for him, watched him as he died, and then at the end they go and they beg for his body. Okay? So, I'm just trying to briefly say, God woke me up to read Matthew chapter 27. How does it relate to our Torah portion, right? That's what we will figure out as we make our way through. Okay, so Jesus has died for us. There was an amount of money that appeared during his death. Blood was spilled, and he was made to look like sin, right? So as we move into our Torah portion, we're going to talk about how this applies to our patriarch Abraham. And I also want to note, that the society that we are learning about, this culture, this Hebrew culture, is a patriarchal society. And a patriarchal society means that the father is the head, which it should be that way, and everyone else follows suit. Now, let me write this word down. We got Abraham is our patriarch. And Abraham is going to birth out the nations. Okay. So, we have a patriarchal society, and we're going to flip back to Genesis chapter 12 so we can begin our Torah portion and try to work out how Matthew 27 relates. Now, verse 1 says, "Now, the Lord said to Abram, get you out of your country and from your kindred and from your father's house to a land that I will show you." So this is already going against how Abraham was raised, because his dad is currently alive. So he's telling him to leave his father, leave the patriarchal society. And in this patriarchal society, the father marries a wife, he has children. If they're male, the firstborn will go and create a livelihood for the family. And then as the more children come, each child has a portion of their responsibility, but the burden is on the firstborn son. Okay? Now, if the father should pass, the burden of taking care of the family moves to the first son, whoever the firstborn son is. So that's what we're going to see here. So it says, get out of your country, get out of your father's house to a land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless them that curse you and curse them that curse you, and in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Now, our last Torah portion, we went through the genealogy of how everyone descended from Noah's children, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, right? And we know that Abraham is a descendant of Noah, right? Noah at the time was the priest, and it's going to kind of not pass to Abraham, but Abraham was raised in the understanding of the priesthood. He knew what the priesthood was. He was on the earth at that time. Now, Abraham was raised in a pagan society. Remember we talked about the character Nimrod? Guys?
Yes.
Now, Nimrod rose to be a mighty leader, right? That he was a idol worshiper. He even had Abraham's father creating the idols. And there's a Jewish fable that they had him creating the idols, and the idols all fell down in the presence of God just to show that God was the true God. Okay? So we're coming at a polytheistic society, which is where they worship any and everything, and we're taking a person who grew up in that, who worshiped the stars and the sun and the skies and everything else, to building a relationship to the one true God, and God coming to that person and having to reveal through his miracles, through his promises, that he is the true God. Because one of the things, the challenges that God would have to face with Abraham is to get Abraham to believe that he is God. Because it's like, why did this guy just follow him without any hesitation, right? I believe it's because God presented himself to him. I mean, he's looking up at the stars, and God came down and spoke to him. And so he just was going to play it out and say, well, let's see how far this goes, right? But he had to trust the Lord to go and respond. And he says, at the end of this thing, I'm going to give you all these blessings. I'm going to give you all these children, and I'm going to give you wealth. I'm going to make your name great, right? And as we read, they gave us the genealogy in chapter 11, right?
Amen.
In chapter 11, they gave us the genealogy of his father, right? So Abraham's father was Terah, right? And Terah had 3 sons, Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. Now, Haran dies, right?
Right.
Which makes Lot, his son, a what? An orphan,
Okay.
right? And Sarah is barren, right? And in the polytheistic culture, when a woman is barren, they believe she's a curse upon the husband, right? So that's another reason why God chose them to, father the nations, because he had to use them to prove who he was and what he could do. So with that curse, he created a blessing, right? So that's something that we will see as we discover these people. So, and then Sarah, they say, everyone's talking about Sarah is his sister, right? But she had, they shared the same father, but they didn't share the same mother, right? So that's how they are gonna, we're gonna see in the Torah portion that Sarah is related to him, but not a direct descendant. But let's move on. Okay, so now Abraham departed after the promises that God made. Abraham departed, and he spoke to him, and Lot went with him, and Abraham was 75 years old when he departed out of the country of Haran. His brother's name was Haran, but he also departed out of that land. And Abraham took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. Now, as Abraham takes off with Lot, right? He takes off with Lot, who is an orphan, and he takes off with Sarah, who's barren, and he's following after a God that he really doesn't know a lot about, right?
Right.
Okay? So they passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, to your seed will I give this land, and there built he an altar to the Lord who appeared to him. Now, again, God keeps talking to Abraham about his seed. Well, Abram, I should say, about his seed. Why do you think that is, after what I briefly said? Anyone have any thoughts? So the question is, God keeps coming to this man and saying, I'm going to bless you and your seed. But he doesn't have any children. So why does he keep coming to Abraham, or Abram, saying, I'm going to bless you and I'm going to create a great nation out of you?
Because he's still connected to Noah's promises.
That's a good answer. He is still connected to Noah's promises, right? And in the promises, he has to fulfill that he's the God that can do the impossible thing, which we know as we read later on in the book. God says, is there anything too impossible for God? No, there's nothing that's impossible for God. So we are moving forward, right? And after God made this promise to him, he creates an altar to him. And he removed from there to a mountain on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Hai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. Now this is where they start to build their relationship, right? But right now he doesn't know him as the source of all things. He just knows him as some God. And Abraham, he's journeying on, he's going on still toward the south, and there was a famine in the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. Now God told him just to leave his father's land, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was headed toward Canaan, but they stopped in the land of Canaan, right? Well, they first went into Haran, which in the Hebrew actually means delayed. Delayed, right? That's what that word means in Hebrew. They were supposed to kind of move forward, but they stopped. They built an altar, and then they had not made it to the place where God was trying to get him, to the land of Canaan, which is modern-day Israel. Okay? So we just want to think about this, because God tells them to go one place, but they make a stop. And on the way to this land, they run into a famine. So Abram goes down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. So they wanted to go to Egypt so they can get some food and have some preserves, because as we saw, Abraham wasn't just traveling with his wife and his nephew, who he kind of adopted into as his son, to treat him like his son. He was also, he had slaves. He had people that he had to take care of.
Right.
And he was taking his father's family as well, because Terah actually was on the traveling. He traveled with them as well to a certain point. Okay, so he had all these people that he had to provide for. And is still not looking at God as the provider of all things. So he went to Egypt, and it came to pass when he had come near to enter into Egypt that he said to Sarah, his wife, behold now, I know that you are a fair woman to look upon, right? So she's a beautiful woman. So much so that he was afraid that they would take her, even though she's his wife, and kill him, right? Now, they come up with this idea, because I don't want to read all of this because it's a lot of chapters, but they come up with this idea to say, okay, tell them you're my sister, which is true. That way, if anything happens, I don't die. Why is this important? That's my question to the audience. Why is it important? Because a lot of people are like, well, why did he just cast off his wife like that?
I have no idea.
That's God's promise.
No, okay, so we started out talking about Matthew 27, right? But that's not uncovered yet. We're talking about we're in a patriarchal society, right? If anything happens to Abram, she's done for.
Right.
So his idea was, I'm the patriarch of our entire group. If I die, all is lost. I don't have an heir.
Right, right.
So it's better for you to go there and be taken than for me to die and all is lost and everything that we've come here with is destroyed, right? Okay, so that's why they kept doing that. A lot of people are like, well, why did he always say that? You know, just throw his wife off, right?
He didn't have an heir.
He didn't have an heir, and then he's the patriarch of the family, which he is responsible for everyone that he's responsible for.
So he was taking responsibility.
So he was, in a way, taking responsibility, and she honored him enough to follow his instruction to move forward and go stay in Pharaoh's house. Now, the thing is, God had to show himself to Sarah as well, because we already know that they were in a polytheistic society where she was seen as a curse, right? Because she was barren. So any woman that couldn't produce a child, they would say is cursed. So God had to prove himself through her as well, that he was going to be her redeemer. That word redeemer just popped up. And I want us to pay attention to it. And as we look to why this connects to that. Okay? So God had to be Sarah's redeemer and redeem their bloodline. She was the one who God, even though he talked to Abraham, once they married, they became one. So that promise was to both of them that she would have a seed and she would become the mother of the nations, right?
Amen.
In order to do that, he's got to remove that barrenness off of her.
Right.
So he had to prove himself, which is why when she was in Pharaoh's house, no one could touch her. Because God protected that promise and that seed. Which, so no one, she went into Pharaoh's house, all of a sudden curses came, because his original promise to Abram was, anyone that blesses you will be blessed, anyone that's cursed will be cursed. So when they took his wife from him, they were separating something that God had blessed. So a curse is going to fall on them, right?
Right.
So that's why all these curses are coming up to Abram. Why am I having these terrible nightmares? And all of a sudden we're being attacked by plagues.
Right.
And he says, I think you're the source of things. And God came to him in a vision. Came to Pharaoh in a vision and said, get her out of your house. Let me see where we are. Because that's the end of chapter 12. Yeah, and Pharaoh went to him and he says, why did you tell me that she's your sister? And Abraham was pretty much like, because I was in fear of my life. You know, I don't know you. I don't know these people. All I know is my wife is beautiful and everybody wants her, right? So he let them go because God, he wanted that curse lifted off of Egypt. So he let them go and he returned Abraham's property back to him, which not that she's a piece of property, but she belongs to Abram. She belongs to the world, right? Because she's our mother. So anyway, returned him to her unharmed, right? And then in addition to that, he left with the wealth of Egypt. Do y'all see that?
Yes.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So, now, Abraham was already from a wealthy family, right? But during that famine, people were probably struggling and not making ends meet like they normally would. So God kind of redeemed them in that situation as well to let that, you know, let that wealth come to them from Pharaoh. So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they went away, and his wife and all that he had, meaning not to harm him and to let them go. Now, we are caught up to chapter 13. We're learning about our patriarch. We're learning about this man that honors the idea of the patriarch, right? He's not a bad person. He doesn't really know much about God.
Right.
He just knows that he is a God, right? That's all he knows at this point. And the only way God can help him get to know is to continue to prove himself. So in this moment where she was with Pharaoh, it was an opportunity for God to prove himself that he would protect and to bless, right? So there's one thing that God was able to do at this point was the blessing. He fulfilled that blessing and protected his wife, right? And what else did he do? He also walked away with wealth, additional wealth, I should say.
Right.
Because Pharaoh gave him some money. And so we get, and then his wife was protected, so Sarah was protected. So we still have that promise of the seed, right? Okay, so Abraham went out of Egypt. We're at chapter 13. And he with his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him into the south. They're still not going where God told them to go. They're just meandering all over the time, right? And Abraham was very rich in cattle and silver and gold. And he went on his journeys from the south even to Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai, to the place of the altar which he had made there at the first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now, Abraham seems to be very familiar with building altars. Because every point he gets to, he stops and he builds an altar. I think in this Torah portion, he builds at least 2 altars, right, to God. And he talked to God and communed with him.
This indicates that he had to have been trained in some kind of priesthood.
Yeah, it shows us that he knew how to honor God. It shows us that they were building relationship. I mean, because they made sacrifices to all types of gods. But this time, he's specifically designating his altar burnings and his sacrifices to God versus just to anything, which is new for him, the idea of serving one God. It doesn't say he just built altars and blessed the God of the trees, blessed the God of the water. He built it directly for God. And so we're at verse 5 of 13, and it says, Lot also went with Abram and had flocks and herds and tents. So they, like I said, they were a wealthy family. So Lot had inheritance too from his own father. And the land was not able to bear them that they might dwell together. For their substance was great so that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelt there in the land. And Abram said to Lot, let there be no strife, I pray you, between me and you, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself, I pray you, from me. If you will take the left, then I'll take the right, or if you depart to the right, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes, and what did he do?
He looked at the good land.
Right, he took it all. he looked at the entire plain of Jordan, not just one side. He looked at the entire plain, and it was well watered, and it looked like the Garden of Eden, which is why. I mean, you're in a territory where it's desert, you thrive, you're agricultural people, you thrive in the presence of water, right? So he's, you know, not so much making a selfish choice, but he's making the easy choice. You know, I don't have to work, I don't have to dig wells, everything is just set forth, right? But Abraham, being a person that doesn't mind hard work, right? Doesn't mind as long as he's at peace, as long as he's able to create a living, he was fine with any land, right? So Lot, down at 11, he chose all the plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed east. And they separated themselves, the one from the other. Abraham dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent toward Sodom, right? But the men of Sodom were wicked, and they were sinners before the Lord exceedingly. And the Lord said to Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, right? God's starting to, his sentences are getting a little longer once Lot left. And he's talking to him, and he's continuing to say, lift up now your eyes and look from the place where you are northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all that the land which you see, to you will I give it, and to your seed forever. And I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall your seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and the breadth of it, for I will give it to you. Then Abraham removed his tent and came and dwelled in the plain of Mamre, which is Hebron, and built there another altar. So this is the third altar. So far we have 3 altars that he's building specifically to God. So he's moving from polytheism to monotheism, right? He's serving one God. And God is still talking about this seed, still talking about redeeming. And we're trying to figure out how in the world is he going to do this. Now, chapter 14 is a discussion about the priesthood. And the priest at the time of Abram was Seth, right? And Shem, sorry. The priest at the time is Noah's son, Shem, right? And chapter 14 is talked about in Psalms chapter 2, where it's talking about why do the kingdoms rage. Y'all know that scripture? It says, why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves against the rulers to take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision, which is 4 kings against 5. So as you can make a reference to that. But that's what it's talking about. Now this is where we will meet Melchizedek, which I think we talked about in the last session, that Melchizedek has no beginning and no end, because Melchizedek is a title. It's not one particular person, right? We're going to put Melchizedek over here. And Melchizedek is the high priest, right, of Israel. And currently, in Abraham's time, it's Shem. So we should say Shem is the reigning Melchizedek, however you want to say it. So he's the reigning high priest. So what's happening here? Lot is over there in Sodom. And it says, and it came to pass in the days that Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Eleazar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tiddo, king of nations. That's 4 kings, made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shimber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. Shimber is Shem, the Noah's son, okay? Okay, so it's 5 against 4, which is referencing Psalms 2. All these were joined together in the Vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. Now, 12 years they served Chedorlaomer. In the 13th year they rebelled. And in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, and smote the Raphaims and Ashtaroth, Karnaims, and the Zuzims. These are giants also. Because one of the things, I don't know if we mentioned in our last Torah portion about Noah and his children, they had killed off all of those Nephilim, but one of Noah's daughters-in-laws had that in her bloodline, which is why it still was prevalent in the earth after they flooded the world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now this is talking about the giants right there. And the thing is, they don't want to pay tribute to the king anymore. That's what this is all about. This is all about money. So they're having their dispute, and then they returned. I'm at 7. And they came to Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites, and dwelt in Hezron Tamar. And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same as Zoar, and they joined battle with them in the Vale of the Siddim. And this vale is very rocky, and it has a lot of pits, and it's a lot of dirt. It's very hard to travel upon. So it was the worst place to have a battle.
Mm-hmm.
And down at 10 it says, the Vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, right? And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they fled to the mountains, and they took all the goods. Now we're setting this up because Lot traveled to Sodom. He chose to go that direction.
Right.
So Abraham is the patriarch of his family.
True.
Even though Lot took his group, he's still his uncle, right?
Absolutely.
And he's still responsible for his nephew. So he had to go, and he took all his men that were able to fight. And because actually the battle had run on, and someone was able to escape the war and run back to Abram and say, Lot's in trouble. So that's how he found out about it. So he's going to take his people and go to battle because he's got to save his brother.
So,
Well, in the Bible it says brother, but a nephew. And that's why in the Bible when they talk about she's my sister, she's my brother, it's because they all come from the same line, and they're just so close that they look at each other as brother and sister. Okay, so Abraham heard that his brother was taken captive, and he armed his trained servants born in his own house, 318, and pursued them to Dan, and he divided himself against them, he and his servants by night, and smote them and pursued them to Haba, which is on the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot, and his goods, and the women, and the people. And the king of Sodom went to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and of the kings that were with him at the valley of Sheba. Now, Melchizedek came of Salem and brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. So Melchizedek was the king in that other group, Shem, Bear, King, Shem, and he brought forth, because he was the high priest at the time, so he was going to break bread, and they were just going to solve this family dispute, which was between them, because they didn't want to pay tribute to the people anymore. So that's why this whole war started. Now in the process of this, Lot had to be redeemed, right? He had to be rescued, right? And all the goods that came from that war, they tried to give it to Abraham, but Abraham decided to make a choice. Now, as we're watching this Torah portion, we're seeing the character of Abraham and how it reflects, and how God is watching him as well, right? He's watching him to see what are the choices he's going to make. You know, he's got all them. He's got the opportunity to have wealth, but he decides to not take the wealth, but only take what God is going to give him. Now
Right.
he's getting to a point where he's beginning to trust the Lord, right? So, because he could have taken everything. I mean, he rightfully wanted it more, but he said, I'm only going to take, you know, what God gives me. First of all, these people are evil. We've already made the sentenced that the people of Sodom were evil. So he doesn't want to bring those people into his group, right? Because he's serving God. Got his people worshiping one God now. And he doesn't want to bring a bunch of idol worshipers back to the fold. So he's like, set them free. I'm just going to take Lot and, whatever else belongs to me. And he made a vow, and he said, I've lifted up my hand to the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth. So now he's starting to see God as he is, as source, right? That I will not take from a thread, even to a shoelace, and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me in Aner, Eshcol, Mamre, and let them take their portion. Now, we're talking about Abraham as the patriarch, right? He's the father of nations. He's wealthy. He's someone that follows God's principles, because you guys know how God's always talking about widows and orphans, and he took in his orphan nephew. So he's following the principles of God, and he's doing a very good job. And this is why God continues to walk with him and continue to push these promises on him, because he's seeing this as a man of great character, and he's the right stuff that he needs to use, right, to move forward into fulfilling this promise that he wants to do. So, as we move forward, I still have this question as I'm reading this Torah portion now, of how does it relate to Matthew 27, right? How does this Torah portion relate? Has anyone ever come up with an answer yet, based on what I'm saying about Abraham being
As far as him seeing God as a redeemer?
Yeah, seeing God as a redeemer. How he's going to redeem us through the seed, through Sarah, right? Anyone have any comments on what we've learned so far? No? Everybody's quiet this week?
Well, I'm thinking, there's quite a few things that could probably be brought out. But I'm seeing Abraham as a person that, he's covenant minded, I'm thinking. And he's understanding what God has become to him.
Right.
And God is showing him that there's even more, to being a patriarch at this particular point in time. And that if he continued in this way, then he would do even more for him. And that's basically what I can see right now. As far as him saying that, as far as him not being introduced to the covenant as of yet. But God has made promises to him.
Right.
And he's receiving those and acknowledging them and trusting God without God doing anything in particular for him.
Okay. Anyone else have any connections? So this is a question I have to answer, right? But I'm going to draw a line here to the seed, right? Is it connecting the seed that Sarah produces So, now, let's make some connections, right? Because we want to talk a little bit to you, not just read. So God promised Sarah a child, right? And she ends up having a child, but not the way that they had planned, because as we kind of read further into this portion, we know that Hagar and Abraham are going to get together and have Ishmael. Trying to see if he changed his name yet. Not yet. Abram and Hagar have Ishmael. But that's not the promise that God said, right? So eventually they're going to have Isaac, right? And through Isaac, we're going to create the tribes of Israel, right? The 12 tribes. And as we see the 12 tribes come through, right, we are going to go through a period of time where the children of Israel are going to be, because we're about to get into this promise about how the children of Israel are going to move away from God. They're going to be dispersed throughout the land, right? But God's still going to bring them back, right? Now, the 12 tribes, and included in this is the tribe of Levi, right? Who's the priesthood. That's messy, right? And out of the priesthood, we know that Jesus is from the tribe of Levi, right? And Judah. Am I wrong?
No.
So I'm going to direct us to, thanks to Shane, Luke chapter 3. Now, you guys remember when we were talking about the genealogy last week? Mm-hmm. And I said, take the time to learn these genealogies because they point to our heritage, right? Now, Luke chapter 3 reads like this. Chapter 3, verse 23, it opens up this genealogy. And Jesus himself began about 30 years of age. This was after Jesus had been born. He had gone into the wilderness. He passed the test. A dove showed up, and the Holy Spirit blessed him. And it said Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being as the son of Joseph, which was the son of Heli, which was the son of Metah, which was the son of Levi, which was the son of Melchi, which was the son of Janna, which was the son of Joseph, which was the son of Matthias, which was the son of Amos, which was the son of Nahum, which was the son of Elzli, which was the son of Nagi, which was the son of which was the son of Matthias, which was the son of Shimi, which was the son of Joseph, which was the son of Judah, which was the son of Jonah, which was the son of Resa, which was the son of Zorobabel, which was the son of Selathiel, which was the son of Neri, which was the son of Melchi, which was the son of Adai, which was the son of Qasim, which was the son of Elmodam, which was the son of which was the son of Josie, which was the son of Eleazar, which was the son of Joram, which was the son of Mattat, which was the son of Levi, right? Which was the son of Simeon, which was the son of Judah, which was the son of Joseph, which was the son of Jonan, which was the son of Eliakim. And it goes on and on and on, right? And it wants you to see, which was the son of Mela, which was the son of Menon, which was the son of Metatai, which was the son of Nathan, which was the son of David, right? And the son of David was the son of Jesse. So Jesse was his father. And Jesse's father was Obed, which was the father of Boaz, which was the son of Salmon, which was the son of Nason, which was the son of Amminadab, and the son of Aaron, which was the son of Esrom, which was the son of Phares, which was the son of Judah, which was the son of Jacob, which was the son of Isaac, which was the son of Abraham, which was the son of Thera, which was the son of Nachor, right? Which was the son of Saruk. Now this is the Torah portion from last week. These names at the very bottom are appearing here, which is chapter 11, the son of Saruk, which was the son of Ragal, which was the son of Philek, which was the son of Heber, which was the son of Selah, which was the son of Canam, which was the son of Arphaxad, which was that weird name, which was the son of Shem, which was the son of Noah, which was the son of Lamech, which was the son of Methuselah, which was the son of Enoch, which was the son of Jared, which was the son of Melaleo, which was the son of Canaan, which was the son of Enos, which was the son of Seth, which was the son of Adam, which was the son of God. Now, all that came from this one seed that God promised, right? And through that promise, we see that God redeemed every person that runs all the way from Sarah's seed, Isaac, to Jesus Christ, right? So, still doesn't connect to Matthew 27, right? Now, the thing is, because that was Leviticus chapter 3, right? I'm sorry, Luke and Leviticus. That was Luke chapter 3. Luke chapter 3 is showing us that Jesus came from this one seed, right? Through Sarah and Abraham. And we see how God redeemed and showed us his promises. He's going to make a covenant with us. We had a big problem at the beginning of the story, which when Adam and Eve, they started out, they lost the authority of the earth, right? The power and the authority of the earth. So God had to figure out a way to come back through Abraham's seed, right? And get the, redeem that title, right? Redeem the land, right? Is it starting to make sense now from Matthew 27 when Jesus got up on the cross? He spilled his blood. He became sin. He died. He bought us with a price. And we've been redeemed. Is it making any sense to anyone?
Yes.
It makes sense. Okay. That through this whole thing, Matthew 27 is connecting to this Torah portion, showing that God is our Redeemer.
Yes.
I hope. No?
I mean, yeah, I know God is our Redeemer. I'm seeing different aspects of Abraham being a patriarch who took on a barren wife and an orphan, and how God redeemed that line. But I mean, I don't know if I'm connecting the whole thing. I'm seeing it.
Oh, you're seeing it? Well, that's the important thing, is to see that this all relates to God redeeming his people, right? He started the earth over. He started it with 3 people. Well, not 3 people. He started it with 8 people. And from that, we get all the people on the earth. And then we're meeting our patriarch Abraham, who is kind of representative because he has like characteristics like Christ. But through all of that, God is just proving himself to a people. He's proven himself to a people that came out of a culture that worship more than one God, to being able to change and prove themselves throughout just to worship him alone. So, okay.
What about, how does the 30 pieces of silver relate to Abraham? Is it just...
Oh, okay, so, we're getting a little closer, right? Okay, so, 30 pieces of silver relates because Jesus is our high priest, right? When he took on this, when he got himself on the cross, right, and died, there was 30 pieces of silver that were present, right, which was our bride price. When God was redeeming us, he redeemed us to marry us and to transition us back into his bride, right? So we've been bought with a price. Now, how it connects to Abraham is that Abraham was always constantly redeeming people. He was turning them, bringing them into his family.
He was born through the bloodline of a Redeemer.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was born. What are you trying to say?
I don't know. I'm trying to connect where...
Oh, okay. So, what did I say? Okay, so Abraham is the patriarch. He is the line that God used to redeem his people. And through that line, Jesus came, right? He was the ultimate redeemer. And the 30 prices of silver showed up because when we lost our authority in the garden of Adam and Eve, and Satan took it away, the title of the earth fell out of our hands because we had authority on earth. And then the title was taken away. So Jesus redeemed it through 30 pieces of silver.
Right.
So that's what that means. All right, so I hope that makes sense. But it's just really to introduce us to the character of Abraham, who is our patriarch, and the one who started our journey into learning who God is. All right, so we're at chapter 15, and it says, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, fear not. I am your shield and your exceeding great reward. And Abraham said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the steward of my house is Eleazar of Damascus? And Abram said, behold, to me you have no seed, and lo, one born in my house is my heir. And he's talking about Eleazar, who was one of his servants, and pretty much his first in command. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this shall not be your heir, but he that shall come forth out of your bowels shall be your heir. Right? So it's still talking about this promise. And he brought him forth abroad and said, look now towards heaven, and tell the stars, if you be able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your seed be. Which is true, right? Even today, all the generations of the earth come from this promise. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it unto righteousness. And he said to him, I am the Lord that brought you out of Ur of the Chaldees to give you this land to inherit it. And he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? And he said to him, we're going to make a covenant, right? We're going to make a promise, and I'm going to fulfill it. And he said, take a heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took them all, and he divided them in the midst, and laid each piece against one another. But the birds he divided not. And when the fowls came down upon the carcass, Abram drove them away. And he's protecting this promise because he's trusting in God not only to fulfill the promise, but also to keep his part of it as well, which is to be someone that believes in this God. You know, God has been doing all these wonderful things for Abram, right? And he wants to fulfill it. Okay, now, so he took to him all these and divided them in the midst, right? And he made sure nothing touched it because this was designated for God. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and a horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said to Abram, know of surety that your seed shall be a stranger. So this is a prophecy going forth about what's going to happen to the seeds that he's going to promise him, which is they're going to be a stranger in the land, which we are a stranger in this land, right? Because we are a part of this blessing. He's going to be a stranger in the land, and it's not going to be theirs. And in this land, you're going to serve people, and you'll be afflicted for 400 years, which is also the time frame that God gives evil to reign on the earth. As we know, 400 years passes by, and then he has his fill of it, and then he moves in to stop the corruption, right? So, and also that nation whom they shall serve I will judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. And you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall come out again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So this is the promise that he's making to him. And he's pretty much telling him everything that's going to happen from his beginning of his start with the Lord to his end, right? He's not only telling him about the children that he's going to come, children that he's not seen yet, but he's also telling him about he's going to die in peace, and that he's going to fulfill all the promises that he told him to. So it came to pass, God comes down, and he walks through the pieces of the sacrifice, right? And he says, to your seed I've given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the river of the Euphrates, the Canaanites, the Kenizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Rephaims, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. So all the land that is currently inhabited by other evil people, God is going to give that to the children of Israel. Okay, so that's what's happening in that one. Now, I think our Torah portion goes to chapter 17, right? So I kind of overviewed it and just said, for chapter 16, Sarah seems to be getting impatient. Now, from the time of Sarah in Abraham's promise to it actually being fulfilled, I don't think it was that long. I think it was under 20 years, you know, from God saying, I'm going to give you a seed. But when you're 90, right, 20 years is a long time. So I understand why she was a little impatient. So she tried to push herself in the way, just how like we all done. You know, it's not fulfilling how God said it's going to come to pass. It's taking too long. I'm going to intervene on my own.
But it
Right?
seemed impossible. I mean,
Yeah.
don't beat the lady up. She was 64, barren,
Yeah.
and getting older.
Uh-huh.
And then God comes with his 5th promise.
Right.
And she's like, all right already.
You're right.
But she's probably looking at her husband like he's insane.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and God is invisible. Like sometimes he would take form, but we haven't seen him yet. We just have this voice,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But there's a good lesson in there, I think, about
Patience.
God. What he says is what is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can take it to the bank. All right. So yeah, that's what we're seeing. Sarah is coming to the point where she's wanting to help the promise along. So she comes up with an idea and says, take my handmaid and then you can have a seat. So we know the story. They take the handmaid, they have the baby, and they name it Ishmael. And they think that this is the promise, right? But in the midst of that promise, well, in the midst of this occurrence of Ishmael, Hagar kind of gets a little full of herself, right? And she tries to lord it over Sarah. So then Sarah does something which is almost out of character and kind of lashes out at Abraham and said, look what you did. You know, now she thinks she's better than me, right? So he gives her power and says, you know, you do with her what you will, right? And I'm sure being the type of person that Abraham was, this person that saw more than just what the person was on the surface, he kind of looked deeper at things. He felt bad because first she is carrying his firstborn, right? Unfortunately, she's not his wife, but she, you know, they're just kind of in a big mess now. And they're thinking like, well, if I get rid of her, this is the only promise that I can hold on to. It's tangible, it's right here. So what do we do?
She was a wife.
Yeah, she was a handmaid, and she was not his wife. She was,
In verse 3.
in verse 3, no, it said, and Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar, her maid. So she's not, and, let me read the rest of it, had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan and gave her to her husband to be his wife. Okay, well, she was a mistress.
She was second wife.
Second wife. Anyway, the point is, they created a baby. And this baby ends up being in conflict because he's potentially taking the right of Isaac, right? So she says, do what he gave her the right to say, do with her as you will, right? Whatever pleases you. So she started treating her harshly, which is not the way we should treat our servants or anyone that we are in relationship with. So Sarah was in the wrong, Hagar was in the wrong, Abraham didn't know what to do. It was just a big old mess, right? So she runs, right? But because she's carrying Abraham's seed, and God made that promise to her, well, to him that the whole nations will come up out of your seed, he has to go and get her back. So he sends an angel after her. God sends an angel after her to bring her back and lets her know that even though he's not the heir of the promise, he's still a valuable person and important to God's work, right? Because out of him is birthed 12 princes, right? And that's where we get the Arab people, or the Muslim people, I think. Yeah, they got an Abraham in their book too.
Yeah.
Anyway, so where are we at now? Okay, so she's come back, right? Because they said to go back to your house, right? And then Abram was 90 years old, and God came again. to him and said, I am the Almighty God, walk before me and be you perfect, right?
Mhm.
So right now, he doesn't have any problems with Abraham. And he's continuing to build relationship with him. And he's continuing to test Abraham through every trial as they move to different places. He's challenging him with his faith. And what did they say? It was accounted to him for righteousness, right? He really trusted and believed that God was going to fulfill these things. And God continued to show himself some as a being that kept his word. When the sticks wouldn't perform, the sticks wouldn't provide, the rocks wouldn't talk to him, God did talk to him. And I'm just being silly. Okay. So now he's talking to Abraham and he's still telling him the same thing. I'm going to redeem you. I'm going to multiply your seed. And it's all because God has a plan, as we see in Matthew 27, to get the deed back from the hands of the accuser of the brethren, right?
Amen.
So Abraham fell on his face and God talked with him. And as for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of many nations. Neither shall your name any more be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made you. Right here, God has decided that he has lived his life perfectly enough to change his name, right? And so God is coming with a covenant or a, what do we say, an agreement, right? It's not written down on paper, but it is a covenant that he fulfilled. And he said, your name shall be changed to Abraham, and I will make you exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come out of you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you in their generations forever, for an everlasting covenant, to be a God to you and to your seed after you. And I will give to you and to your seed after you the land wherein you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, which is modern day Israel, and I will be their God. And God said to Abraham, you shall keep my covenant, therefore, you and your seed and your generations. This is my covenant. So this whole thing is God making this promise. But he's also saying you got one more test to do, right? Which is to circumcise every male body, right? So they did it. 8 days they were at a commission, right? He that is 8 days old shall be circumcised. I'm sorry, not 8 days. But everybody that is 8 years and older shall be circumcised, which is not so good, not so comfortable when you're 8 and above and you have to be circumcised, right? You have to be laid out for a bit. Now, he that is born in your house, he that's bought with your money, everybody was worshiping God. That's what this is telling us, isn't it? It's showing us that everybody in God's house was worshiping. Well, everybody in Abraham's house was worshiping. He was converting them, you know, because if he was your master, you'd have to take on his principles. You'd have to participate in the festivals. You'd have to participate at the altars. When God shows up, everybody has to prepare a feast, right? So they knew to honor him that way. And this is God also fulfilling his promises to incorporate the nations, and how people are, they call them Gentiles, or people that aren't Hebrew or born in Israel, but they were serving God as well, even before Isaac showed up, right? So they circumcised all the male children, right? And he says, whoever doesn't is not going to be a part of my covenant. And so God changed Abraham's name, and he changed Sarah's name, and he said, I will bless her and give you a son of her. Yea, I shall bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, shall a child be born to him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. But God was like, no, he's not the one I'm going to do the promise with. Ishmael's going to be great, but Isaac will be the one that I'm going to keep my covenant with. Okay. Then we move on to 22. And he left off talking with him, and God went up from Abraham And Abraham took Ishmael his son and all that were born in his house, and all that every male, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the selfsame day, as God had said. And Abram was 90 years old when he was circumcised. And Ishmael was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And the selfsame day was Abraham circumcised, and Ishmael his son, and all the men of his house born in the house, brought with money of the stranger, were circumcised with him. So we see Abraham fulfilling his word to the Lord to circumcise his children. And as we move forward into his character, because that's the end of our Torah portion, we're going to see how God is continuing to have a plan to redeem us in Matthew 27, which will come out more later. I know it's like, what? Should not make any sense.
No.
But we still have to get deeper into this Torah portion to see his character. But so far, what have we learned? He's a patriarch. If he died, the whole thing would have been
For
naught, right?
Mhm.
So we had to make sure. So every time you see that scene of him say, "Go with Pharaoh," don't be upset. We got to keep the patriarch alive. We see Sarah had to trust the Lord as well, because she was living and walking around among all these people without anything to show for herself, right? She was looked down as a curse, which probably was not a good feeling, right, for her. So God had to prove himself to her. And once he does, right, he wins her over. And she actually becomes very famous with winning souls to God as well, you know, with her character and everything in our teachings that we will see. But after this point, like after she has Isaac, they only mention her about 3 times in the Bible, if no one's ever noticed. You know how I'm always talking about the woman who doesn't have a name? It's because we're in a patriarchal society. You know, everything goes under the father or the brother or the husband, which is okay. God set it up that way so that we would always be taken care of. I think that's my time. I could talk because I was gonna, well, I have a little more time. And the only reason I say it's all gonna come together. But we have to learn more about Abraham. You know, we have to know more about what it means to actually be a redeemer, you know. So I'll touch on it next week.
Okay.
Okay? So we're going to close a little early. And thank God for helping us, hopefully making sense. I feel like I'm all over the place, but I know that our Redeemer lives. And so far, he has put on the table Matthew 27, right? He's paid a price for us so that we can walk to, so we can, claim this title, right? Which I don't want to give it away, so I'll talk about next week on how Matthew 27 will make sense. And I just bless everyone. Thank you for joining, if you're on Facebook or YouTube. Hope this was a good portion for you. Be blessed.
Amen.
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 Is it off?
Yeah, that's good.
Keep on that.
Very good.
Corner, can you get that camera? The one right there.